The exact moment avoidance decides to reach out after no contact. There's a moment, quiet, invisible, almost electric, when an avoidant who's pulled away suddenly stops, rethinks everything, and decides to reach out. It's not random. It's not an accident. It's psychology. And when you understand it, their silence becomes far less mysterious. Most people think avoidants reach out when they miss you enough. But that's not how avoidant psychology works. Avoidants don't move toward pressure. They move towards safety. When they pull away, they're overwhelmed, not because of you, but because of the emotions they don't know how to manage. No contact gives them the room they think they need until something surprising happens. At first, they feel relief, space, quiet, control returning. But then slowly, another feeling creeps in. Not guilt, not longing, curiosity. Why aren't they chasing me? Why isn't my distance working the way it always does? Did they stop caring? Your silence creates a new emotional reality they didn't expect. And the moment their relief is replaced by uncertainty, the moment they realize you are not waiting at the door for them, something shifts. Their brain begins to reinterpret you, not as a source of pressure, but as a source of peace. That's the exact moment avoidance feels safe enough to move toward you again. Not because you begged, not because you proved your worth, but because your absence communicated something more powerful than words. I'm secure enough not to chase what isn't choosing me. And that energy, calm, grounded, unbothered, is what makes them pick up the phone, type your name, and reach out after all that silence. But here's the truth you cannot ignore. An avoidant reaching out doesn't mean they've changed. It means you've stopped feeding their fear. If they return, it's not your job to convince them to stay. It's your job to honor the standard that made them miss you in the first place. Because the moment you show up with self-respect, you're no longer waiting for their message. You decide whether they've earned a reply. Avoidants don't come back because of pressure, only when they feel emotional safety. This is the foundation of their entire relational pattern, and understanding it changes everything about how you interpret their silence and their eventual return. Most people assume that pulling away is a sign they've stopped caring, lost interest, or made a firm decision never to come back. But for avoidants, withdrawing is less about giving up on the relationship and more about protecting themselves from emotions they haven't learned to regulate. Their distancing is a coping mechanism, not a verdict. When someone responds to that distance by pleading, chasing, demanding answers, or trying to fix the situation, it accidentally confirms the exact fear that made the avoidant pull away in the first place. The fear of being overwhelmed, controlled, or expected to emotionally perform in a way they don't feel capable of. To understand why safety, not pressure, brings an avoidant back, you have to look at the emotional blueprint they carry from childhood or past relational experiences. Many avoidants grew up learning that closeness comes with a cost. Maybe it meant losing independence, or being responsible for someone else's emotions, or being suffocated by expectations they couldn't meet. So as adults, the closer they feel to someone, the more they anticipate that old pattern repeating. Distancing becomes their way of regaining emotional oxygen. It's how they keep themselves from drowning in feelings they haven't processed. Now, from the outside, this distancing looks cold, confusing, even cruel. But inside, the avoidant is overwhelmed, flooded, and trying to decrease intensity by any means necessary. Pressure of any kind, even well-intentioned pressure, activates this overwhelm. The moment they feel someone needs them, wants clarity from them, or expects them to return affection at a level they can't manage, their nervous system goes into retreat mode. This is why so many people feel like the more they reach out, the further the avoidant pulls away. They're not rejecting the person, they're escaping the emotional demand. When the pursuing partner continues reaching out, calling, asking for explanations, trying to talk things through, or pushing for reconnection, the avoidance need for space only intensifies. They start to see the person not as a source of comfort, but as a source of pressure. And nothing makes an avoidant stay away longer than pressure. But here's where the psychology becomes fascinating. When the pressure stops, their perception of the person completely changes. When someone gives them space without resentment, without emotional explosions, without chasing, something in the avoidant softens. The absence of pressure allows their nervous system to settle. They no longer feel cornered or suffocated. They no longer feel responsible for someone else's emotional well-being. In that stillness, they can actually feel their own emotions again, something they couldn't do when overwhelmed. They may begin to feel curiosity, nostalgia, or even warmth. These feelings were always there under the panic, but they were buried beneath the survival instinct that told them to run. Safety for an avoidant doesn't look like being told, "I love you, come back." It looks like emotional neutrality, the sense that the relationship won't consume them if they re-enter it. Emotional safety for them is the feeling that the other person is stable, grounded, and self-sufficient enough that the avoidant doesn't have to manage anyone else's reactions. When the other person respects their space without bitterness, the avoidant no longer sees connection as a threat. They begin reinterpreting the person as emotionally safe rather than demanding. Instead of feeling chased, they feel allowed. Instead of feeling smothered, they feel seen. An avoidant reaching out after silence is often their first sign of trust. It means they believe the emotional cost of approaching has lowered enough that they can handle it. They aren't coming back because someone convinced them to. They're coming back because the absence of pressure created inner room for them to want to. That shift is subtle but monumental. And this is why no contact or light communication works so effectively. Not because it manipulates them, but because it gives their nervous system what it genuinely needs to re-engage. Emotional space is their oxygen. And once they can breathe again, they can feel again. When they perceive safety, small memories resurface, the moments they laughed with you, the comfort they felt in your presence, the sense of ease they had when things were good. These memories do not compete with pressure. They only emerge when pressure fades. Emotional safety also removes the fear that returning will trap them in expectations they can't fulfill. If they feel they can come toward you without losing themselves, then reaching out becomes possible. The irony is that the very thing most pursuing partners fear, stepping back, is the thing that actually makes an avoidant feel close again. Not because distance creates desire in a manipulative sense, but because distance removes fear. And for an avoidant, fear is the enemy of connection. Safety is what revives it. Your silence disrupts their expectation of being pursued, triggering curiosity instead of fear. When someone has an avoidant attachment style, they operate from a deeply ingrained belief that closeness will inevitably lead to discomfort, pressure, or emotional demands they cannot meet. Because of this, they often expect other people to pursue them, especially when they pull away. This expectation isn't arrogance, it's conditioning. Avoidants unconsciously assume that once they distance themselves, the other person will react in predictable ways, reaching out, worrying, seeking reassurance, asking what went wrong, or trying to regain the connection. This predictable pattern gives the avoidant a sense of control and safety because it confirms their internal story. People always want more from me than I can give. But when you break that pattern, when you don't chase, argue, explain, or fight for closeness, you interrupt a script they've lived by for years. Instead of reinforcing their belief that they will be overwhelmed if they move closer, your silence presents something unfamiliar. It introduces an unexpected emotional variable, uncertainty. For someone who relies on predictability to feel safe, this shift is powerful. At first, they may interpret your silence as confirmation that distance was the right choice. They may tell themselves they prefer the space, that things feel calmer, that they're better off emotionally separate. Avoidants are skilled at self-protection through emotional rationalization. But as time passes and you remain grounded, detached, and non-pursuing, their internal narrative starts to shift. What once felt like control gradually morphs into a question they can't easily answer. Instead of thinking, "I knew they'd text me if I pulled away," they start wondering, why aren't they reaching out? This curiosity isn't about ego, it's about attachment. Avoidants may fear closeness, but they also fear abandonment. They want connection, but they want it on terms that feel emotionally safe to them. When you don't fulfill the role they expected, you become unpredictable in a way that pulls their attention rather than triggering their defenses. Their curiosity grows because the outcome is no longer guaranteed. They're not used to someone stepping back without anger or desperation, and they're even less used to someone respecting their need for space without withdrawing in rejection. Your silence doesn't punish them, it unsettles their assumptions. And in that uncertainty, emotions they had numbed or suppressed begin creeping back in. They may start remembering moments when things felt good. They may wonder if you're moving on. They may replay certain interactions, trying to understand what shifted. Avoidants spend a lot of time in their heads, analyzing and replaying situations privately rather than expressing emotions outwardly. So your silence creates internal movement. Even if you can't see it, they feel a kind of emotional vacuum, and nature abhors a vacuum. Where pressure once existed, curiosity begins to expand. That curiosity is deeply tied to something else. The avoidants need to maintain a sense of interpersonal control. When they can predict your reactions, they feel secure in the distance they create. But when they cannot predict your behavior, they must reassess their assumptions. This reassessment forces them to become emotionally engaged again, even if they wouldn't admit it. They may start checking your social media, asking mutual friends about you, or replaying your last conversations in their mind. What they're really doing is trying to understand the situation without exposing themselves emotionally. Curiosity gives them a reason to reconnect with their own feelings, but in a low-risk internal way. What truly amplifies this curiosity is the sense that you are no longer orbiting around them emotionally. Avoidants are used to people adjusting to their distance. When that adjustment doesn't happen, when you simply continue living your life, they perceive this as a quiet, powerful shift of emotional authority. It challenges their belief that they are the ones who decide the tone, distance, and pace of the connection. Your silence subtly communicates that you're not waiting, not dependent, not tied to their rhythm. And paradoxically, this makes you feel safer to them. A person who isn't triggered by their distancing is a person who won't overwhelm them with emotional demands later. Curiosity also emerges from the possibility of loss. Avoidants are slow to recognize what they feel when they're close to someone because their instinct is to turn the emotional volume down. But space works differently for them than for others. Once the overwhelming feelings fade, the buried positive ones start resurfacing. They realize they might miss your presence, your energy, your companionship. They may not label it as missing you at first, but the emotional pull is there. And because you didn't chase, this pull grows in a low-pressure environment, which makes it feel safer and more manageable. Your silence also places the avoidant in an unfamiliar emotional position. Instead of feeling like they're being pursued, they feel themselves gravitating toward you. That shift is incredibly significant. It rebalances the dynamic. It activates a different attachment system, one that makes them approach instead of escape. Curiosity is the first stage of re-engagement, long before longing or vulnerability shows up. It's the mental spark that makes them check their phone more often, think about what they would say if they reached out, or wonder whether you'd still be open to hearing from them. This entire psychological chain reaction happens quietly, internally, and without announcement. Avoidants do not express these thoughts. They feel them in the background of their mind, and your silence becomes a non-verbal message that works directly on those deeper layers. It disrupts fear and replaces it with intrigue. It dissolves defensiveness and replaces it with wondering. And ultimately, curiosity becomes the emotional doorway through which an avoidant begins thinking about reconnecting. The shift happens the moment relief turns into uncertainty about losing you. When an avoidant first pulls away, the dominant emotion they experience isn't sadness or regret. It's relief. Relief that the emotional intensity has decreased. Relief that they can breathe again. Relief that the pressure they associate with intimacy has temporarily lifted. This relief is real, and acknowledging it isn't meant to invalidate your connection. It simply reflects how their nervous system processes closeness. For someone with an avoidant attachment style, emotional intimacy can feel like stepping into water that's just a little too deep. They want to be there, but they fear going under. When they step back, their entire system relaxes. The world feels quieter. They feel more in control of themselves. They tell themselves they did the right thing. And for a while, this narrative holds. But relief is only the first stage. It is not permanent, because relief exists only in the absence of perceived threat. And when you don't chase them, don't protest the distance, don't attempt to fix the relationship or pull them back, something unexpected happens, the absence of threat turns into the absence of connection. At first, they don't consciously register this. They enjoy the quiet. They may dive deeper into work, hobbies, solitude, or distractions, believing they have regained the emotional autonomy they were craving. But slowly, subtly, something starts to shift beneath the surface. Avoidants expect that when they pull away, the other person will fill the gap with pursuit. That pursuit confirms a predictable cycle they understand. They create distance, the other person tries to close it, and they maintain control by choosing how much closeness they allow. When you don't play your part in this cycle, their relief begins to soften. What was once a comfortable, predictable script becomes something new, something they can't fully explain. Instead of feeling in charge of the distance, they start to feel the weight of it. Instead of believing they can return at any time with certainty, they begin to question that assumption. This is where uncertainty enters, not panic, not desperation, just the first flicker of what if. What if you're pulling away too? What if you're no longer waiting in the emotional doorway? What if your silence means something is shifting on your end? Avoidants are deeply sensitive to changes in emotional equilibrium, even if they don't show it outwardly. They notice when someone's energy changes. They feel it. And when your energy is no longer oriented toward them, no longer seeking reassurance, resolution, or reconnection, they become aware of a new possibility, that the distance they created might have consequences. This is not about ego. This is about attachment security. Avoidants fear engulfment, but they also fear abandonment. When they pull away, they assume they are managing the level of intimacy, not risking the loss of the relationship. Your lack of pursuit challenges this perception. It introduces the idea that distance may not be reversible, that you may be adapting, healing, moving forward without them. That possibility shifts something crucial inside them. Suddenly, the silence is no longer peaceful. It has meaning, it has direction, and it's not directed toward them. The moment relief turns into uncertainty is often quiet, internal, and without dramatic emotion. It might hit them while they're doing something mundane, scrolling on their phone, getting ready for bed, driving to work. It might come as a subtle sinking feeling or a mental check-in they weren't expecting. It's not always emotional. Sometimes it's cognitive. A thought might drift through their mind. It's been a while. Then another, they haven't reached out. And another, are they gone? This uncertainty is powerful because it calls their internal narrative into question. Avoidants often tell themselves, people always get attached, or people always want more from me than I can give. Your silence contradicts this. It demonstrates emotional self-sufficiency. It communicates that you're not waiting to be chosen, nor are you defined by their presence. Suddenly, they must reassess who you are in their emotional framework. Instead of viewing you as someone who needed them, they begin to see you as someone who values yourself enough not to chase what isn't reciprocal. This makes you feel safer, more secure, more grounded, qualities avoidants are drawn to even if they struggle to show it. Uncertainty also allows space for their more vulnerable feelings to resurface. While relief drowns out these emotions, once relief fades, the feelings they suppressed start coming back in small waves. They may remember an inside joke, a moment you held space for them, the comfort of your presence, the ease of your energy. These memories don't overwhelm them now because the pressure they once felt has dissipated. Without pressure, their nervous system becomes more receptive to positive emotional recall, and with that recall comes a sense of loss. Not dramatic loss, but a quiet wanting. A subtle realization that something meaningful is missing. This mixture of uncertainty and subtle longing nudges them toward re-engagement. The uncertainty doesn't terrify them, it motivates them. It encourages them to check in, to see where you stand, to test the waters without diving in too deep. They may start small, viewing your stories, liking a post, sending a casual message, or asking an indirect question. They're trying to gauge whether the connection is still available, whether they still have a place in your life, whether the door they once closed is still unlocked. This moment, relief fading into uncertainty, creates the internal space needed for avoidance to reach out. It shifts their mindset from managing emotion to reconnecting with it. And that shift is the psychological tipping point that makes them move toward you instead of away. Your secure, non-chasing energy repositions you as a peaceful presence instead of a threat. For an avoidant, emotional safety is not measured by how much affection someone gives them, but by how little pressure they feel in the presence of that affection. When someone comes toward them with intensity, expectation, or urgency, it activates the avoidant's deepest fear, the fear of being emotionally consumed. They worry that if they let someone close, they will lose their independence, their identity, or their ability to regulate their own emotions. These fears often operate below the level of conscious awareness. They don't sit there thinking, "I'm afraid of intimacy." Instead, they simply feel overwhelmed, like they need space to breathe. This is why chasing doesn't bring an avoidant closer. Pursuing them, even with love and good intentions, confirms their internal belief that intimacy equals pressure. They perceive every attempt to pull them closer as an expectation they must fulfill, and this makes them withdraw further to regain a sense of control. But when you stop chasing, when you step back not with anger or resentment, but with genuine emotional steadiness, you send a message their nervous system isn't used to receiving. Instead of sensing danger, they sense calm. Instead of bracing for emotional demands, they feel a quiet spaciousness. And in that space, they begin to reinterpret you. Avoidants don't react to words. They react to energy. When your energy shifts from anxious pursuit to grounded security, they can feel it, even if you don't say anything at all. They notice the absence of emotional pressure, the lack of urgency, the disappearance of neediness. This shift is subtle but transformative. It tells them that being close to you doesn't mean losing themselves. It tells them that your world doesn't collapse without their presence. It tells them that you are capable of regulating your own emotions, and therefore you won't require them to regulate them for you. This is incredibly important, because avoidants often believe they aren't capable of providing the emotional reassurance or intimacy other people want. They fear disappointing someone. They fear being trapped in expectations they can't meet. Your grounded, non-chasing energy communicates the opposite. It communicates, "I want connection, but I'm not dependent on it." That message is what their system craves. Closeness without pressure, affection without expectation, connection without emotional weight. When you embody this, you become someone they can approach without fear. You become a source of peace instead of a threat to their autonomy. This shift is most noticeable in the way avoidants begin reacting to you internally. When they think of you and feel pressure, they retreat. When they think of you and feel peace, they soften. Your energy creates the emotional context in which their feelings can safely resurface without fear. They are able to feel the positive emotions they suppressed. Affection, interest, curiosity, attraction, appreciation. These feelings were always there, but pressure buried them. Your calm presence allows them to rise again, slowly and quietly, in a way that feels manageable to them. When you stop chasing, you remove the emotional static that blocked them from feeling those things. For the first time, they can look at the relationship without defensive lenses. They can remember the good moments without bracing for an emotional request. They can imagine reconnecting without feeling like they are stepping into a trap. This is why they begin to see you differently, not as someone who might overwhelm them, but as someone who respects their boundaries. And respect is everything to an avoidant. It's the foundation on which trust begins. When avoidants sense that you're emotionally self-sufficient, they relax. They begin to view you as emotionally intelligent, balanced, and stable. They feel drawn to people who do not react dramatically to distance because it signals emotional regulation, something they value more than they often admit. Your ability to step back without shutting down signals maturity. Your ability to stay calm rather than clingy signals strength. Your ability to care without controlling signals safety. This is what makes them feel they can approach you again. They don't approach people who feel chaotic or unpredictable. They approach people who feel grounded. They don't reunite with those who pressure them. They reunite with those who make connection feel effortless. When you embody a centered, self-respecting energy, you become the emotional equivalent of fresh air after a storm. They breathe easier around you. And even though they may not articulate this, they feel it deeply. Avoidants also value people who mirror their own pacing rather than amplify their fear. When you stop chasing, you are essentially saying, "I can match your pace without losing my own." That's a powerful message. It tells them you are not trying to force intimacy, but are willing to let it grow naturally. This aligns with their internal rhythm, slow, cautious, deliberate. When you follow that rhythm, they no longer feel the need to run. Your non-chasing energy also communicates confidence. It says, I know my worth. And avoidants are paradoxically more attracted to people who hold their own value firmly. They don't want someone who collapses emotionally when they pull away. That triggers guilt and discomfort. They want someone strong enough to stand alone if needed. When they sense you are okay with or without them, their fear dissolves. What remains is admiration and often desire. In this space where fear fades and respect grows, the avoidant begins to re-engage. They might first do it quietly, indirectly, testing the waters. They may like an old post, send a quick message, or find a reason to reach out. They do this because they feel safe enough to return. And this safety exists because you stopped trying to pull them in and started simply being a stable, peaceful presence they could come back to when ready. You didn't convince them. You didn't persuade them. You didn't pressure them. You became the one thing their nervous system trusts, calm. And in that calm, they found the space to want you again. Their return isn't a sign of transformation. You still need boundaries and standards to create lasting change. When an avoidant reaches out after a period of distance, it is easy, almost instinctive, to assume this means they have had an emotional breakthrough. You might think they have reflected, changed, healed their patterns, or finally recognized your worth in a way they couldn't before. And while it's natural to hope for that, avoidant psychology doesn't follow that arc so quickly. Their reaching out does not mean they are suddenly ready for deep intimacy or a new level of emotional consistency. More often it means something much simpler. The threat level in their mind has dropped, and they now feel safe enough to reconnect. But safety is not the same as transformation. To understand this, you have to look at what actually causes avoidant distancing in the first place. Avoidants struggle with emotional regulation in close relationships. When connection becomes too intense, too fast, or too emotionally loaded, their protective instinct activates. They distance to regain equilibrium. This distancing isn't cured by time alone. It is a patterned response based on years of learned behavior. Even if they reach out and feel warmth or interest again, their internal wiring doesn't automatically change. Without new relational dynamics in place, without boundaries that make them feel safe and expectations that create structure, they are likely to slip back into old habits the moment intimacy begins to increase again. This is why your boundaries matter far more than the avoidant's temporary desire to reconnect. If you respond to their return with immediate availability, emotional overinvestment, or an eagerness to pick up where things left off, you unintentionally reset the same pattern that created the distance in the first place. They start to feel the pressure again. They sense the emotional weight returning. They unconsciously anticipate expectations they won't know how to meet. And once that happens, the cycle restarts. Closeness, discomfort, withdrawal, silence. Not because they don't care, but because nothing in the dynamic changed. Boundaries interrupt that cycle. They don't punish the avoidant, they create a framework where connection can feel safe, sustainable, and mutual. When you hold boundaries, you send a message that intimacy will not be built on emotional chasing or imbalance. You show that you won't shrink yourself to keep them comfortable. You demonstrate that your emotional well-being isn't dependent on their immediate response or validation. Ironically, this makes you safer to them, not more distant. Avoidants respect people who respect themselves. They feel steadier with partners who aren't reactive, who aren't easily thrown off balance, who don't collapse under emotional tension. But boundaries alone aren't enough. You also need standards. Standards are the expectations you hold for the quality of connection you're willing to engage in. Avoidants can return with good intentions and still offer inconsistency. They may want to reconnect, but they may not yet have the tools to maintain emotional closeness in a healthy way. This is where your standards act as the guiding structure. You decide what kind of communication you require. You decide the pace that feels healthy. You decide the level of emotional availability you need in order to feel safe yourself. Standards are not demands, they are self-protection. They're not ultimatums, they are clarity. When you hold standards, you allow the avoidant to rise to the level of healthy connection, rather than slipping into old relational patterns. And if they can't or won't meet those standards, their return becomes a temporary moment rather than a long-term cycle. This does not mean you punish them. It means you stay grounded in what supports your emotional well-being. It means you don't let the relief of hearing from them override the clarity of what you genuinely need. Avoidants often test the waters when they return. They approach cautiously, looking for cues about what the dynamic will be. They notice whether you've maintained your self-respect or whether you've abandoned it at the first sign of reconnection. When you maintain boundaries and standards, you teach them without confrontation that this connection will only work if it stays balanced. You create a container where both people can show up as adults, not as fear-driven versions of themselves. They may step back again briefly as they adjust, but they won't bolt in the same way if they feel the relationship is grounded in stability instead of emotional urgency. They won't feel trapped because the connection will be built on mutual regulation rather than pressure. Avoidants do not grow through pressure, they grow through consistency. And consistency is something you demonstrate, not demand. When you respond to their return with calm maturity instead of emotional hunger, they see a version of connection that doesn't overwhelm them. When you express what you need clearly and without resentment, you model a communication style they can feel safe engaging with. When you refrain from over-explaining, over-giving, or over-chasing, you show them that closeness doesn't equal chaos. In this environment, they can slowly build new emotional patterns. They can learn to trust the stability of the relationship. They can begin to feel safe enough to step into more vulnerability over time. But this growth happens only when you maintain the standards that protect the emotional ecosystem of the connection. Their willingness to return is simply the doorway. Your boundaries and standards are what determine whether that doorway leads anywhere meaningful. Understanding avoidant behavior isn't about decoding someone else so you can bend yourself to fit their fears. It's about recognizing the emotional patterns at play so you can choose how to show up with clarity, strength, and self-respect. An avoidant reaching out after silence isn't proof that everything has changed. It's simply a sign that your steadiness, your boundaries, and your refusal to chase have created an environment where they feel safe enough to come closer. But the real transformation happens when you decide what you want, what you need, and what you will no longer settle for. Because when you hold your standards with quiet confidence, you shift the entire dynamic. You stop responding from fear and you start responding from power. And whether the avoidant rises to meet you or fades away again, you remain anchored in your worth. That's the true breakthrough, not their return, but your alignment with what honors you. The moment you realize you don't have to chase love is the moment you become someone love naturally gravitates toward. Thank you for sharing this space with me today. Thank you for listening with an open mind and an open heart. And thank you for being willing to look deeper, not just into someone else's patterns, but into your own capacity to grow, rise, and choose yourself. Wherever you go from here, may you move with confidence, clarity, and calm strength. You deserve a connection that feels steady, reciprocal, and real. And you deserve a love that meets you at the level you offer it. Take care of yourself, protect your peace, and remember, the right person won't be scared of the parts of you that shine the brightest. Thank you again, and goodbye for now.